and today we're gonna talk about feral children. Feral children. Those who were either raised by animals, lost in the wild for a long time, or they were just simply neglected and abused by their parents, their relatives, or for some reason they had very little human contact, very little communication. Okay. I will tell you about different cases. Okay. The first group is gonna be myths. So those are very ancient legends, stories that are not documented, and they were just legend, most probably. The second one will be more like urban legends, stories that are not that well documented and that happened 300, 400 years ago, that lack evidence, so we cannot believe them for sure. And the third group are gonna be cases that happened very recently, like 20th century, 21st century. Okay, but before I move further, I want to try and explore together to understand why it is so important to interact, to communicate with your child, and what is happening in the first years of their lives. Before 0 and 3 years old, children have so-called critical period. There is even a critical period hypothesis that I will talk about later. This is probably the most important time in a person's life. Children actually start recognizing phonemes, languages, linguistic patterns right after they are born. So I think that was a Japanese research. They would play different audios to babies and they would recognize the language that their mothers were speaking while they were pregnant. And after 6 months, they can completely understand the foreign and their mother tongue. Yeah, they can differentiate. The brain is completely tuned to the native language after 6 months. During 1 to 3, they start speaking. Their vocabulary grows rapidly. They start using different grammatical forms and structures. And again, this is the most critical period, the most crucial time. Then we have consolidation from 3 to 7. Children start using metaphors, complex sentences. There is also another research where they compare different kids who started reading before they turned 7 and after. I think 5 and 7. Yeah, they compared two groups. One, those who started reading when they were 5, and the other one, those who started reading when they were 7. And actually, those who started reading later when they were 7, they liked reading more and they had broader vocabulary, because actually speaking is much more effective than just reading. That's why learning a foreign language might be so difficult, because our brains imagine thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution without any writing systems. Our brains are made to speak and process speech, slow spoken speech that we can hear, not what we can read or write. So when you cannot really speak, listen to something, it's not gonna have the same effect. And when children, before they turn 7, they usually also get that inner dialogue, inner speech. Okay, so after 10-12 years, usually they fully acquire language, and learning from scratch is impossible. I guess usually children can learn a second language as their first one, so without any accents, before 7. So right before the consolidation ends, before the consolidation period ends, you can learn a second language without. So your brain is gonna perceive it as your mother tongue. Okay, now when we discussed about how important it is to speak to children, to make sure that they are involved in society, now we can talk about cases. Okay, now when we discussed all of these periods, we understood why it is important to talk to children and not to ignore them. Now we can move forward, and I'll start with myths and legends. And the first one is gonna be about Romulus and Remus. You have probably heard about this one. So the myth of Romulus and Remus is one of the central legends of ancient Rome and its foundation story. According to tradition, the twins were born to Rhea Silvia and the god Mars. But King Amuleus, fearing they might overthrow him, ordered them to be drowned in the Tiber River. Instead, they survived and were rescued by a she-wolf, sometimes accompanied by a woodpecker, who nursed them in a cave called the Lupercal. Lupus means wolf in Latin. Later, a herdsman named Faustulus and his wife Acca Larentia raised them. As adults, the brothers discovered their origins, overthrew Amulius, and decided to found a new city, Rome. The image of the she-wolf nursing the twins became one of the most enduring symbols of Rome. I don't know what to add. I think it is a very old myth, even though it only started appearing in, I think, 3rd century after Christ, our common era. How do you say that? But the city of Rome was established in 753 before common era, before Christ. So it is totally a myth, but we can trace how people were speculating about wolves, especially wolves. There are a lot of stories about wolves nursing, rearing the children. I think it's just probably there were cases like that, but also the drastic difference when we think about wolves, that they are dangerous. And actually, there was statistics, I think, from Norway. They realized that most of wolves victims, human victims, were children. 90% or something were under 18. So usually wolves, they eat children, but here they nurture them. That shows that the character is special. It's not a simple human. They are connected with nature. They are they are the chosen ones. Okay. The next one is about Atalanta. The myth of Atalanta tells of a princess of Arcadia who was abandoned at birth because her father, King Lassus, wanted a son. Left on a mountain to die, he was saved and nursed by a she-bear until hunters found and raised her. Growing up close to nature, Atalanta became a fierce and exceptionally swift huntress, known for her skill in hunting and fighting. She is often associated with Artemis, the goddess Artemis. Sorry, too much Spanish for me today. Now I want to read all these Latin words like with Spanish accent entirely. Artemis, the goddess of the wilderness, and is portrayed as independent, resistant to marriage, and deeply connected to the natural world. Atalanta later became famous for taking part in Caledonian boar hunt and for challenging her suitors to foot races, agreeing to marry only the men who could defeat her. Again, she is a superwoman. She is the chosen one. Bear, very cool. I think a she-bear is more interesting than a she-wolf. Then I have Enkidu from Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. Is one of the oldest mythological examples of a wild man created by the goddess Aruru to balance Gilgamesh's power. He lives in the wilderness among animals covered in hair, eating grass, drinking with gazelles, and protecting nature by destroying a hunter's traps. His life changes when Shamahat, a temple prostitute, seduces him over 6 days and 7 nights. After that, the animals no longer accept him, and he is forced to leave the wild and enter human society. He later becomes Gilgamesh's close companion. Transition from nature to civilization. And here I think sex in the way humans perceive it, okay, people perceive it. That's what, like the I think the sense of shame, the feeling of shame is what makes us different from animals. This is how I see it. Okay. And the last one is a fictional character, not really a myth. We're going to talk about Mowgli. Mowgli, in Russian it's Mowgli. That's a character from the Jungle Book, wrote by Kipling. In Russian we don't even say like feral children, we say Deti Mowgli, so Mowgli children. I imagine, do you say Mowgli or Mowgli? I think it's Mowgli. I believe this is also the case, like one of the synonyms. There is actually a real case that probably inspired Kipling to write the book, the Jungle Book, and we're gonna talk about him later, the Indian feral child. Okay. I mean, that's a fictional character. I can recommend to you, of course there are a lot of different cartoons and I don't know if they're movies, but you can try watching the Soviet cartoon on the Jungle Book, Mowgli. It's a very pretty one. It's not funny like the Disney. Is it Disney adaptation? Is the Western. Okay. Next, we're gonna talk about older cases, those that were partly documented, partly disputed. We are not sure. Okay. The first one is Peter the Wild Boy. Peter the Wild Boy was a German boy, probably around 1713, who was found in 1725 living alone in the woods near Hamelin. He could not speak. He was said to walk on all fours and survived by eating plants from the forest. In 1726, he was taken to Great Britain, where he became a public curiosity and attracted attention from writers, philosophers, and the royal court. Princess Caroline arranged for attempts to educate him, but he never learned to speak, read, or write. Later, he was moved to rural Hertfordshire, where he lived for many years as a farm worker, supported by a government pension. In 1751, he briefly disappeared and was later identified in Norwich, after which he was made to wear a collar with his name and address. He lived to about 70 years old, developed a small amount of speech, and died in 1785. Not bad. Modern researchers have suggested that he may have had Pitt Hopkins syndrome rather than being a true feral child. It is interesting because I'm not sure that people in the past didn't have, of course, children with syndromes and autism were born back then, right? So I just do not understand how they would think that he was probably an orphan and with some kind of mental disability impairment. I'm not sure. Or maybe most of kids like that never lived long enough. They were either killed or they would die, naturally. The next case is, that's a French name, okay guys, I'm sorry if I read it wrong. Marie-Angelique Mamie Leblanc, the Wild Girl of Champagne, or Champagne. Marie, known as the Wild Girl of Champagne, was an 18th century feral child found in Songy, France, in 1731, after reportedly surviving for years in the forests. Contemporary accounts described her as wearing rags, carrying a wooden club, and defending herself against dogs before being captured by villagers. Her case remains controversial, and some modern scholars consider parts of the story exaggerated or fictional, though others argue that archival evidence supports its authenticity. According to later research, she may have been of Native American origin and may have lived wild for about 10 years before her capture. Unlike most feral child cases, she later learned to read and write as an adult, which makes her especially unusual. She eventually lived in France under protection and died in Paris in 1775. It is interesting, each time we learn that the child was able to learn how to speak, managed to even learn how to write or read. It actually, I think it means that they were probably older than 3 when they started getting neglected or when they got lost, because usually most of them, I think 100% of those who didn't talk until 3 didn't have the opportunity to practice speaking, to listen to adults, other people. They never learned how to speak. Okay. The next one is also French feral kid, Victor of Aveyron, probably born around 1788, who was found in 1800 after spending years in the woods near Saint-Cernin-sur-Retz. He was captured several times, repeatedly escaped, and eventually became the subject of one of the most famous and best documented feral child cases in history. A young physician, Jean-Marc Gaspard Etat, took charge of him and worked with him for about 5 years, trying to teach him language, social behavior, and emotional connection. Victor made some progress in understanding words and interacting with people, but he never fully learned to speak. His case became important in debates about language education and what separates humans from animals. Later commentators suggested he may not have been a true feral child at all, but a severely abused or possibly autistic child who had lived in extreme isolation. I think those who were left alone for long enough, they can never be taught to speak, to actually speak and form sentences and think in a language. They understand oral commands like dogs and react the same way and probably imitate, try to make the same sounds when they want something, but it is not a true human speech. I think it's just fascinating, it blows my mind how language is probably the most important thing for a human. That's what makes us actually human. And sure, animals have their own languages. They are scientists who study the differences in dialects of tits in Japan and crows and dolphins, but it is not the same. It is not the same. The next one, I even watched a very big video on this guy, Dinesen Char in Indian guy, and he was probably the prototype, the inspiration for Kipling for his The Book of Jungle, the Jungle Book. Dinesen Char was an Indian boy who became known as the real-life Mowgli. He was reportedly found in 1867 in a cave in Uttar Pradesh with wolves and was taken to the Sikandra Mission Orphanage in Agra. Missioners said he moved on all fours, preferred raw meat, made sounds like a wolf, didn't care about heat or cold temperatures, and never learned to speak normally. Over time, he learned to stand upright, wear clothes, and even got addicted to smoking. Nicotine. He lived partly within human society but never left the orphanage. His story became famous in later retelling and is often linked to Kipling. He died of tuberculosis in 1895 at about the age of 35. Some say 25. I'm not sure. There are also a lot of similar cases of feral children who were raised by wolves in the same orphanage, supposedly. But I think they were just British missionaries who realized that this story became very popular in British newspapers and they just wanted some clout, so they made these things up. They would call just mentally impaired children feral. The next one, Kaspar Hauser. Kaspar Hauser was a boy of unknown origin who appeared in Nuremberg, Germany in 1828, apparently around 16 years old and barely able to speak. He carried 2 letters, could could write only his name and at first could say little beyond a few repeated phrases. Later, after learning more language, he claimed he had spent his entire childhood locked alone in a small dark room with almost no human contact. His strange appearance and mysterious story made him famous across Europe, and many people speculated that he was of noble birth, possibly connected to the House of Baden. He was later wounded in one attack and then fatally stabbed in 1833 under unclear circumstances. His identity was never proven, and his case remains one of the most famous examples of extreme isolation rather than true animal rearing. I also watched one video, like a true crime video about this case, and it's old and we don't know for sure, but I think he could really be an unwanted child of a noble lady. But the fact that he learned to speak, and as we know, could speak decently, that probably means that he got isolated after he turned 2 or 3, and they still spoke to him something, but thinking of living in a small dark room, supposedly he couldn't even stand up. He couldn't even stand up in that space. It was that small. Crazy. Then we have Anna from United States. Anna, the pseudonym of Alice Marie Harris, was an American feral child from Pennsylvania who was discovered in 1938 at the age of 6 after being kept in extreme isolation since infancy. Because she was an illegitimate child, her family hid her away, and for years she was severely neglected, malnourished, strapped to a chair or cot, and given almost no human interaction. When found, she could not walk, talk, or care for herself, and doctors described her condition as one of the worst they had ever seen. After rescue, she made some progress. She gained weight, learned to follow simple commands, and developed limited speech and social behavior. However, she never fully recovered and died in 1942 at the age of 10. Very sad, extremely crazy. Amala and Kamala, or Kamala. I never understood how to pronounce that lady's name. So Amala and Kamala were 2 girls from Bengal, India, who were presented in the 1920s as children raised by wolves. According to the main account, they showed behavior described as wolf-like, walking on all fours, eating raw meat, avoiding daylight, and so on. Amala died in 1921, and Kamala later became somewhat more social, learned a few words, and could walk upright for short periods, but she died of tuberculosis in 1929. The case became one of the most famous wolf child stories in the world, but it is highly controversial because nearly all the evidence came from one man, the missionary Joseph Amrito Lal Singh. Many later researchers have treated the story as unreliable or even a hoax rather than a proven feral child case. I imagine it was faked. Man just wanted some clout. And then we have well-documented cases that are proven that happened recently. And the first one is Genie. Genie is very famous, I think. It is a pseudonym of an American girl who was subjected to severe abuse, neglect, and social isolation. From about 20 months old, her father kept her locked in a room, often restrained with almost no stimulation or normal human interaction. Because she was exposed to very little speech, she did not develop language in childhood. Authorities discovered her in November 1970 when she was 13 years and 7 months old and placed her under state care in California. Her case quickly became important to psychologists and linguists, especially in debates about language acquisition and the critical period hypothesis. She made clear progress in nonverbal communication and some social skills, but she never fully acquired a first language. Later placements in foster homes and institutions were unstable, and some of them involved further abuse, after which many of her gains reportedly declined. Little reliable public information is available about her later life. On Wikipedia, I'm not sure how reliable it is. It was said that she is probably in state care in California now, so that would make her very old. It would make her 60, 70 years old now. Then we have Marcos Rodriguez Pantoja, a Spanish man born in 1946 who became famous as a modern feral child case. According to his account, after severe childhood abuse, he was sent away at about 7 years old to live with a goat herder in the Sierra Morena. After the goat herder died, he survived alone in the mountains for about 11 years, reportedly living close to wolves. In 1965, at age 19, he was found by the civil guard and forced back into society, where he had to relearn speech, clothing, and ordinary social habits. Although he later worked, did military service, and lived among other people, he struggled to adapt and often said he felt more comfortable in nature than human society. His case was later studied by anthropologist Gabrielle Manila and inspired the film Among Wolves. Well, this one, again, the boy learned how to speak. He was 7 years old, so it was just about relearning. Kinda like Robinson Crusoe, but no island, and he was a child. By the way, if you are from America, do you know about Robinson Crusoe? Did you have to read that book in school, in high school? Because I was asking people and they didn't know about Robinson Crusoe, and I got surprised because in Russia I feel like even if you didn't read the book, it is very famous. If you didn't read it, it's very cool. The next one, John Seponia from Uganda. His case became known in the late 1990s as a modern feral child story. According to widely reported accounts, he fled into the jungle as a small child after seeing his father kill his mother, and he survived there for months with fervid monkeys who reportedly shared food with him and allowed him to move with the group. He was later found by a villager and taken back to human society, where teachers Paul and Molly Waswa cared for him and helped him relearn speech, social behaviors, and daily life. Even after returning, he reportedly kept unusual movements and habits linked to his time in the wild. His story became internationally known through media coverage and documentaries, though, like many such cases, it is based more on reported testimony than on strict clinical documentation. Who would be able to document something like this? There was actually an experiment like that. There is a legend about the king Psammetichus. He wanted to find out which language was the oldest, and he conducted an experiment. He wanted two children, to be left alone. So they left, like they were left in a meadow or somewhere, a barn. They lived with sheep, and they were shepherds who fed them, but they couldn't speak to them. And after a few years, children started saying bekos, and bekos meant bread in Phrygian. So he thought that Phrygian was the most ancient language, but maybe Bacchus was just the onomatopoeia, like imitation of what sheep were saying, like bang, bangers. Just a legend, but an example of an experiment like that. The next case, Oksana Malaya, born in Ukraine in 1983, is one of the best known modern feral child cases and became famous for behavior described as dog-like, according to doctors, and later reporting she was a normal child at birth but was severely neglected from about age 3. Okay, that's when the consultation starts. And spent years living among dogs. When authorities found her at 7.5, the whole consultation period is gone. She could not speak properly, ran on all fours, barked, slept on the floor, and copied the habits of the animals around her. After being removed from her parents, she underwent years of therapy and education, eventually learning to speak clearly and function in everyday life. As an adult, she worked on a farm and was able to live within society, though she remained intellectually impaired. Okay, the next one is a case from Russia. Ivan Mishukov ran away from his abusive home near Moscow in 1996 at about 4 years old. He survived on the streets for about 2 years with a pack of stray dogs, feeding them and in return receiving protection and warmth. Reports say the dogs defended him so strongly that police needed several attempts to separate him from them. Unlike many other feral children cases, Ivan had already learned some language before fleeing. So after rescue, he was able to relearn speech and readjust to human society much more successfully. He was later placed in care, studied in a military school, served in the Russian army, and as an adult was reported to be living and working in Russia. I read a little bit more about this, and there were even like TV shows with him. I think now he works in a factory. He's a factory worker. Again, he was 4 years old. He was able to retain his speaking skills, and I think even though he lived with the dogs, he was still speaking to some people. Some people were feeding him. 90s in Russia were horrible, so there were millions of children like that on the streets back then. was an American child found in Florida in 2005 after years of extreme neglect and isolation in a filthy back room. When police discovered her at almost 7 years old, she was malnourished, covered in sores and insect bites, still in diapers, unable to speak, and showed almost no normal social or emotional response. Doctors found no major underlying physical disorder and concluded that her condition was caused mainly by severe environmental deprivation. After being removed from her mother, she spent time in the hospital, foster care, and special education, and later was adopted by Bernie and Deanna Olero. With long-term care, therapy, and family support, she made gradual progress in movement, communication, trust, and daily skills, though she remained permanently affected by the neglect. The next one, I couldn't find much about this case, but I think it is reliable. It is a documented case of the Russian bird boy, Vanya Yudin, or Ivan. Yeah. Vanya Yudin, often called the Russian bird boy, was a 7-year-old boy found in 2008 after living in near total isolation with his mother in an apartment full of bird cages. Reports said she fed and kept him alive but almost never spoke to him, so he did not develop normal human speech and instead communicated by chirping, flapping his arms, and using bird-like movements. Social workers described him as unable to engage in ordinary human communication when he was rescued. After his discovery, his mother gave him up to authorities and he was placed in care for rehabilitation. Like many modern feral child cases, this was not true animal rearing but neglect. And I have the last one, the cheetah girl or the feral girl of Siberia. Again, a Russian case. Natasha, often referred to as the cheetah girl, cheetah is the name of the city, was a 5-year-old child taken into care in 2009 after reportedly spending her entire life shut inside a flat with cats and dogs. Police said she could not speak Russian, refused to use a spoon, barked, jumped at people, and showed many behaviors associated with animals around her. The apartment reportedly had no heat, water, or sewage, and she had never been outside. After her rescue, she was placed in an orphanage and monitored by a psychologist while her mother was questioned. Like many other cases, it was an example of neglect and abuse. I hope all the parents, all the adults who were involved in these served their sentences. I even feel like people like that deserve death, honestly. Oh well, now we know that it is important to pay attention and spend time with your children. Of course, they're not gonna end up being like the stories that we discussed earlier if they watch Cocomelon, but they're not gonna be feral children. They're gonna be iPad children. Well, thank you for watching this video. I hope it was interesting. Maybe not as relaxing as usual, but still, thank you for staying Thank you for 70,000 subscribers, guys. Thank you very much. I like, it's been more than a year and a half since I started doing YouTube and ASMR, and each time when I think about it, I cannot believe that I have so many people that watch me. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and support.